It may be past cranberry season for some, but not for me. And if you feel the same, I have the perfect solution for you here. This is my version of Cranberry Bliss bars from Amy's Healthy Baking, a copycat of a Starbucks treat. And they are delicious and satisfying no matter what time of the year it is. So if you'd like to see how this is done, stick around because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name's Roy. I'm a home cook and amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now this will come as a shock to you, but this is someone else's. Of course, I'm going to put my own spin on it because you know I can't do it exactly as they did it. But what I'm doing today is some Cranberry Bliss bars from Amy's Healthy Baking. Now this is, I guess, a Starbucks copycat recipe, and I guess there are some changes that she's made to it as well, such as omitting the white chocolate from the bar crust, but I will go over that as we go further into this. But let us go over the ingredients. I have here 1 cup of all-purpose flour, and here I have 1/2 cup of sugar replacement. Now in her recipe, she uses coconut sugar. She often bakes and cooks with clean eating ingredients, which I don't follow, but I will be writing up this recipe down below, as well as linking to her blog, and I will put in any changes that I'm making to get the bites and points that I end up using. I am on the Healthy Better Balance plan, which is the equivalent to the old WW Blue plan, which I guess is now the WW plan. So those are the bites and points that I give, but I don't have the bites and points for her version since I wasn't doing it that way. I have here 2 tablespoons of light butter, and I'm using, I can't believe it's not Butter Light, that's the one I tend to prefer, but whichever one you use. She does use regular butter in her recipe, but I wanted to save a few bites and points and calories. Here I have 1/2 cup or 55 grams of cranberries that I am going to end up chopping. You could process them in the food processor. Personally, I think they get a little too fine because it's kind of hard to just buzz real quickly. But if you want to use a food processor, you can. I'm just going to chop them up. I also have here 2 tablespoons or 14 grams of cranberries also, and that is for the topping. There's going to be a bar level and then like a frosting topping kind of situation. And again, I'm going to do the same thing, just chop them up on the cutting board. I have here 1 egg at room temperature, and if it looks a little odd, that's because the yolk did break as I was breaking it into the bowl, but it doesn't matter. I have here 1½ teaspoons of vanilla extract, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, not baking soda, baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of ground ginger. Now also components for the topping, I have here 1/3 cup of my light homemade cream cheese, and if you have not seen that video, it was the very first video that I did with an introduction to myself as well as that recipe for the cream cheese, and I'll card that up here in case you haven't seen it. I also separated out the cream cheese part into a tutorial, a separate tutorial in case anyone wants just that. I'll link to both of those below. I have here 1/3 cup of non-fat Greek yogurt. I prefer using Fage. In case you were wondering, for the 1/3 cup of my light homemade cream cheese, I ended up using probably a well-rounded 1/2 cup of yogurt to get that, just in case you want to only get that amount. But I usually do a big batch and just have it on hand. I have some cooking spray here, and I also have some confectioner sugar replacement. In her recipe, she does use regular powdered sugar, again, because of the clean eating ingredients that she uses. I am using this Bestie powdered sugar replacement. Doesn't give us an aftertaste. My partner, Paul, is especially sensitive to that aftertaste. I can generally overlook it, but if I can do without it, it's even better. And that you need about 4 to 6 tablespoons, depending on the texture that you want to get and the sweetness. So I do have my tablespoon here. That's why it's not portioned out, because I'll just do 4, see how it goes, and move on. All right, so those are all of our ingredients. Now, let me shuffle a few things around and we'll get started with lining our pan and chopping up our cranberries. Okay, so for the pan, it's just an 8-inch square pan. You could use a round pan, I'm sure. I'm just using my square pan, and I have some foil. She does recommend using foil to do this. You could use parchment if you wanted. I'm just going to press it into place, and I left extra length on the ends just so it'll be a little easier to pick up, because if you just have enough to fit into the pan, sometimes it's a little difficult to grab that edge and pull it out. So I do have a little extra length on the edge, but I'm just going to press it right in to follow the form of the pan. Okay, so now that that's in, you just want to coat it a little bit with the cooking spray, just to make sure that it will release off of the foil easily enough. Now this will go off to the side, and I will bring in my cutting board, and I'm just going to chop them roughly. They don't have to be too fine, but again, if you prefer using a food processor, you can. Just do really quick, short pulses, and just check after maybe 2 or 3, because it does process pretty quickly. But I'm just going to carefully chop them, because especially when you're first cutting through them, they're going to want to pop like that. And just, as I said, just carefully cut through them. Once you actually have each one cut, they're not going to bounce around as much, so it's a little easier to chop them. But just going to chop the ones for the topping, chop the ones for the base itself, and I'll be back. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is whisk together the flour, ginger, salt, and baking powder, and just whisk that together into one homogeneous mixture, which will only take 15-20 seconds. You just want to make sure all of that salt and baking powder and spice is dispersed fairly evenly. Now I'm going to set that aside. Now I did forget that the butter should be melted but slightly cooled, so let me melt that down real quick. All right, so it's partially melted, as you can see, and that's what I prefer to do. If you need to melt butter and slightly cool it, but say you forgot, as I did, don't melt it completely, but leave some of it whole. So then once you whisk it around, it'll melt the cool butter and cool down the melted butter. It won't be as hot that way because you left some of the butter whole. So that should be good. So I'm going to add that into my bowl with my vanilla, because that's really going to boost that vanilla by being put into that hot butter. And then I'm going to whisk in the egg. And because it's still slightly warm, I want to whisk it pretty quickly, just so that the egg doesn't have a chance to kind of cook it all. And it doesn't have to be perfectly incorporated, because now we're going to add in our sugar replacement. As I said, she used coconut sugar, and you could use regular sugar if you didn't really care as much about the bites and points. And now I'm going to add it into the flour. In the recipe, she does say add the flour into the wet. Honestly, I've never found a reason that one works better over the other. And I did already whisk the flour into the larger bowl, so that's the way I'm going. And then I'm just going to stir that together with a spoon, because if I were to use the whisk still, the stuff as it started to come together would clump in the whisk and just make a big mess. So I'm not going to do that. Just mix that together until it comes together and forms a little dough. And then we're going to add in our half cup of diced cranberries. Well, it was half cup cranberries diced. If you saw I did a tutorial a while back about reading recipes, And when a recipe has a comma after an ingredient, such as 1/2 cup cranberries, comma, diced, that means you measure out the cranberries, then dice them. If you dice them first and measured out the 1/2 cup, you'd have a lot more liquid in your recipe than you want. So always pay attention to that in the recipe. If it had said 1/2 cup of diced cranberries, I would have diced the cranberries, then measured out the 1/2 cup. But as it is, they said 1/2 cup cranberries, comma, diced. So that's the way you measure it. And she also does give the weight measurement, which is how I prefer to measure things that are oddly shaped or rounded, like berries or nuts or chocolate chips, things like that. I prefer to weigh them just because filling up a cup and making sure you have an accurate cup just seems a little challenging to me. That could just be me, but I prefer weighing that kind of stuff out. All right, so this is all mixed. So now we're going to bring in our pan. And this is a very thick dough, so you need to spread this out into the pan. And I think the last time I did it, I used an offset spatula to do it just because it's a little easier, but I don't know if I'll do that this time or not. Also, last time I believe I did use the food processor for the cranberries, and I would probably do that again the next time because it is a bit more time consuming to do it by hand. So why not save a few minutes? But we're just going to spread this out as evenly as we can into our pan, which it is a bit sticky, so it will take a little bit of time. Okay, and I did switch over to my offset spatula. It's just a little bit easier, especially trying to get into the corners. With that big spoon, it is a little difficult to get into the corners. If you don't have an offset spatula, you could just use the back of a spoon, a small spoon, and that would be just as good. But you want to make sure you get this into the corners. It will expand a bit as it bakes, but you just want to get it as even as you can. All right, so now this is going to go into a 350-degree oven. I've already preheated it for about 14 to 17 minutes until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean. Then we're going to have to let this cool before we do the topping, but I will show you what it looks like when it comes out of the oven in just a moment. All right, so I took this out of the oven about 10 minutes ago. You want to let it sit for about 10 minutes in the pan before you remove it. So I'm going to just take the corners and, as I said, easily lift that out, and then peel back the foil. And then I'm going to turn it out. You can see it's nicely browned on the bottom, not so brown on the top, and it is soft. So she calls it a cookie layer, but it's not really firm like a cookie, but it is going to be tasty. Now, one thing I did forget to mention was she did say you could add some white chocolate chips, chopped up white chocolate, into the cookie base, which I guess is pretty standard for the Starbucks version. I did a calculation that if I use 28 grams, 2 servings of Lily's white chocolate chips, chop them up and put them in here, it wouldn't alter the bite point. So next time I will add some Lily's chips to this layer. There are also a couple of other things that she does with the topping, but I will talk about that shortly once this is cooled and we are ready to frost it. So I will be back. Okay, so I have cooled my cookie base. I actually chilled it in the fridge for about 15 minutes after letting it sit for about 15 minutes. And I've transferred it to a cutting board just so that I can frost it and then cut it. Amy suggests preparing the frosting just before serving, but I keep them on hand for a few days. But if you are going to keep them on hand because of the yogurt and cream cheese, which is from the yogurt, you do want to store them in the refrigerator, and then you can take them out and let them come to room temperature before you have them. But we are going to make our frosting right now. And in looking over her recipe again, I may have changed this to powdered sugar. I don't think I did, because I would have put powdered sugar substitute. But in her directions, she says to add this liquid stevia, which she uses a lot. I am not a fan of the taste of stevia. so I do not use stevia. But in any of her recipes that I do make, I always replace the liquid stevia for whatever the comparison is for a granulated or powdered version of sweetener. But first thing, I'm going to move that aside for now, and we're going to, I did decide to add, she says in her notes, where I mentioned about the chocolate chips, she does mention that the frosting can have a teaspoon of lemon zest to be more like the original. I didn't notice that the first time I made this, so I think I'm going to try adding that. I love orange and cranberry together. So I am going to incorporate a teaspoon of lemon zest. So I am going to incorporate a teaspoon of orange zest. I don't know if I said lemon zest previously, orange zest, into the frosting. First things first though, we need to combine our cream cheese and our Greek yogurt. By combining the two of them, you get more of a middle ground and makes it so you need less of the powdered sugar replacement. But first thing we need to do is blend this up. So let me just blend these two together. Okay, it only takes about 15 seconds. You're just trying to merge everything. Then I'm just going to zest my orange. Now when I zest my orange, I don't turn the zester upside down and scrape this way and let it fall in. I want to be able to store it in this little ridge here. So what I do is I turn it upside down so that the little cavity is on top, and then zest from the bottom. So I'll just run back and forth, and that way I'm storing all of my zest in here and I don't have excess going into whatever I'm making. So you just need about a teaspoon, so I'm gonna gauge, that's probably about half of this medium-sized orange, and take my teaspoon and run it through. That's about right, so I'm gonna add that in, as well as any of the residual zest hanging around on the zester, and just blend this in. Okay, now as I said, it's 4 to 6 tablespoons of powdered sugar. I'm gonna start with 4 and then check the consistency and the sweetness level and see if it's acceptable to me. Still not sweet enough, so I'm going to add the other 2 tablespoons of the powdered sugar replacement and just blend that in. Okay, so the final step for our Cranberry Bliss bars is to then take our frosting and coat the top of our cookie base. Now I'm just using a spoon so that way I can spread it around and not use an offset spatula. A lot of you may not have offset spatulas, so I figured I'll show you doing it with just a spoon is just as easy. You just want to get it out to the edges and get it evenly spread. Then we are going to just sprinkle on our diced cranberries, the 2 tablespoons that we had, 14 grams, and just sprinkle that all over. This is where she also says that you could drizzle some melted white chocolate on top, which I guess is more like the Starbucks version. And I did calculate adding in the white chocolate chips to the cookie dough base, as well as having a little bit more that you could melt and put on top. And if you used about 40 grams of Lily's white chocolate chips, it wouldn't alter the bites or points. So next time I'm definitely adding some white chocolate chips, just like I added the orange zest this time. And there you have it, our Cranberry Bliss bars. Now to make them into bars, I do 8 servings. In her recipe, she does 12. But you know me, I want as much of a dessert as I can, or a snack or treat, without denting my bites or points too badly. So I was able to get it to 8 servings and still keep it low in bites and points. Now what she suggests, and which is how I'm going to start off, is to cut it in half first. And then what she does from here is cut each of these halves into thirds, and each of those slices on the diagonal to make little triangles, so that she gets 12 triangles out of this. I am doing bars, and as I said, I'm doing 8, so I'm gonna go about another halfway through. I'm not great at eyeing these things, but I am giving myself some trust here. And then cut each of those in half again. So there you have it, my version of Amy's Healthy Baking Cranberry Bliss bars, which is a Starbucks copycat. These are very tasty, very festive for the holidays. Actually, this was going to be one of my dessert-tember treats, but because I was having some difficulties physically and a lot of things going on, I wasn't able to do this then, so I wanted to get this out now. But a nice hearty portion there, and that portion is only going to set you back 2 Better Balanced Bites or Blue Points. Now, I calculated with the 40 grams of white chocolate chips from Lily's. Now, others may vary, but typically I'm sure it's going to be about the same. But if you just keep it to 6 bites or points for the entire recipe, it shouldn't adjust them unless you've changed something else and that has different bites or points. But I managed to use 40 grams if I were to do it. Now, I haven't done it yet. And I did take the time to check and see what that would change it to. So I haven't given you the other calories and macros yet, but as I said, those 40 grams would not alter the bites or points, but does alter the calories by 20. So for calories, it would be 118. Now this is with the Lily's white chocolate, 40 grams. Calories would be 118, the fat would be 3.3 grams. The carbs would be 33.7 grams, the fiber would be 2.2 grams, and the protein would be 5.7 grams, and that's if you're using the Lily's chips. Now I'm not going to add the little banner here for all of that. I'm going to go by what I used here, and that is with or without the chocolate chips, 2 bites per bar. And each of these bars, if you're following calories, would be 98 calories. As I said, with the white chocolate chips, it would go up to 118, but as I've done them here, 98 calories. And if you're following macros, the fat would be 1.9 grams. The carbs would be 30.8 grams. The fiber would be 0.7 grams. And the protein would be 5.3 grams as I did them here. I am definitely going to be adding the Lily's white chocolate chips next time, just to bump it up a little bit. I'll put probably about 24 grams inside and save the rest to drizzle on top. As I said, the recipe for this I'm going to write up and post down below along with my substitutions. And I will also link directly to her recipe on her website. Also down there, you'll find links to my Amazon storefront, my Built Bar rewards, Fetch rewards, Skinny Syrups code, and my social media, both my Instagram and 2 Facebook groups that I am part of. So go check out the description box for all sorts of information. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and if you did, I'd appreciate you doing the usual, like, subscribe, comment, share, and hit the notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video. We are going to start doing tags again, the group that used to do tags, if any of you ever followed those. But we're going to do them monthly, apparently. Sandy is going to be in charge of it from Life with Sandy, and we're going to do them monthly so that we can still give you a little bit extra, but not be overwhelmed trying to do that along with everything else that we do. But hit that notification bell, and next time any sort of video comes up, you will be notified. So I think it's time for Paul and I to have a little after lunch treat. So until next time, bye.